My name is Sam, and if you stay with me till the end of this story, you'll either hate me or you'll recognize that moment in your own life when one stupid gamble made the whole structure collapse, and all you could do was count the seconds before it all came down. I stole $20 million from people you never want to cross paths with, not at night, not in the daytime, not ever. I'm not going to dress it up. This wasn't some noble heist, no Robin Hood fairy tale with slick guys in fancy suits. I'm just a poker rat from Atlantic City, the kind of guy who sat at the table long enough to learn how to read not just cards but hunger, lies, and the flimsy excuses people tell themselves when they're scared. I had my own excuses for years. When I couldn't pay rent, I said it was temporary. When I broke bankroll rules, I told myself it was a one-time thing. When I lost, I blamed variance. When I won, I called it honest money. But after I touched those 20 million, all the excuses vanished. All that was left was silence, the kind where you hear your own heartbeat and the footsteps of the people hunting you. I didn't come to poker with dreams. I came running away from warehouse shifts, alarm clocks, and the dull ache in my back that whispered life was just one endless Monday. At first, I played small tables, choking down cheap coffee and practicing that one survival skill every gambler needs: don't let your face give anything away. That's the only lesson that actually works in this city. I trained on guys who brought their last $50 just to feel like kings for a night. Then I moved up to the bigger games, the ones where 50,000 meant as little to some as $50 meant to me. At those tables, it wasn't cold from the AC. It was cold because everyone knew the truth. Poker wasn't about money, it was about power. The chips were just the scoreboard. They noticed me when I started winning more often than luck should allow. I wasn't a genius, but I paid attention. One guy, heavyset, from Newark, he always sipped whiskey after strong hands, never touched it when he bluffed. Another guy with a $20,000 watch always glanced at his opponent's cards when he was about to call, like he was begging them to tell him the truth. Small details. Huge paydays. One night a man in a gray suit sat next to me. He smiled politely but never fully. He didn't introduce himself, and I didn't ask. He barely played. He just watched. And when he shook my hand on the way out, he held on longer than necessary, like he was testing if my bones would break. 2 days later, I was invited to a private game in a Brooklyn basement. No sign outside, just a buzzer and a camera. That's where I first smelled real money. Not the paper, but the fear. The kind of fear that comes from people who can't afford to lose. They came with bodyguards, they laughed on cue, they waved waitresses over like royalty. At that table, cards were decrees, not games. I sat down as the guest, entertainment, and the first session I left even. Second session, I pulled a few tens of thousands and realized something. If I kept acting like losing didn't matter, they'd treat me like one of them. I could fake that. I'd been faking things my whole life. By the third session, the air shifted. A man came in with a face you'd forget the moment you looked away. People called him Don, though in America that title's more of a joke than a crown. He didn't play. He observed. His men rotated in and out, bringing chips in cases, leaving with stacks of cash, all so casual it felt like pizza deliveries. Later, I'd understand those nights weren't about the thrill. They were about laundering money, cleaning numbers, making dirty cash look crisp and pressed. At the time, I thought I was part of the theater. I thought I could surf the waves and skim a little on the side. But I wasn't careful. I was exhausted. My sister was in a hospital in Philly, waiting on surgery the insurance company called partially covered. Translation: find tens of thousands or watch the system eat her alive. I told myself not to think about her at the table, but thoughts are stray dogs. They get in the kitchen no matter what. I started looking for shortcuts. And shortcuts? They always lead to long disasters. That's when I spotted the crack in their system. Between the club's cage, the basement safe, and the cars that hauled cash away, there was this middle step. A nightly price list for chips. They take the dirty stacks, convert them into clean chips, then back to cash with a story attached. Usually near the end of the night, when eyes were heavy and even the guards turned human. That's when the guy with the ring handled the overflow, handing it off to couriers. He didn't know that I knew. And I didn't know that he noticed everything. Everyone in those places notices everything, even when they pretend not to. The plan wasn't born from brilliance. It came from fatigue. I realized if I swapped a set of chips in one of those, clean, cases with a nearly identical set, different just enough in weight and balance, the books wouldn't match until much later. By then, blame would land on someone else. I won't spell out the details, no need to feed idiots ideas. Just know this: any system with too many hands involved has space for one to switch. I spent a month watching, a week testing, and one night I slipped out through the back like I was just another guy sneaking a smoke. The 20 million weren't sitting in one place. They flowed, like water through pipes. You just had to set your bucket in the right spot, and make sure it didn't squeak. I didn't believe in my own nerve until I felt my pulse and my wrist sinking with the click of the case lock. When the car alarm flashed across the wet pavement, I realized, adult games are when you stop asking permission from your own fear. My car was waiting at the end of the row, and in my head, one thought kept repeating, this is your one chance, and if you don't take it, tomorrow you'll be counting coins for coffee and pretending that's living. American nights have their own soundtrack: highways humming, windows slamming, neon bleeding across casino floors. I drove out of Brooklyn like I always did, just tired and ready for home. Only this time, the weight beside me wasn't just cash. It was something that bent the shape of my soul. On the bridge, I imagined getting pulled over. I pictured being dragged out, interrogated, asked where the case came from, who it belonged to, where I was headed. I imagined it ending before it even started. Those images would haunt me later. But that night, I pressed the gas and told myself, if God exists, he's either a gambler, or he's not in charge of anything. $20 million isn't money. It's heat. It rises when you're near it, it cools when you're away. I stashed the first half where no one looks because it's too stupidly simple, and the second half where no one looks because it's too obvious. I didn't spend. I waited. I listened. I tried to convince myself I could live quietly. But quiet is the biggest lie gamblers tell themselves after a big score. Quiet doesn't come. Emptiness does. And you fill it with fear. With calculations. How long until they notice? Who do they blame first? How do I play victim, not thief? The real collapse didn't happen that night on the bridge. Not even the next morning when I ditched my phone and checked into a roach motel off the highway. It happened a week later, when I walked into the Philly hospital with insurance forms and a fake smile I'd practiced in the mirror. My sister asked if everything was okay, and I told her work was finally paying off. I stared at the neon wristband on her arm and thought, maybe now it'll be different. Then I saw them. 2 men in the lobby. One reading a paper, the other staring at the floor. I'd seen them in that basement. They weren't supposed to notice me. But standing that close was already a crack in the world. And I knew silence was over. That night, the elevator mirror showed me a face that had already made its choice. If I wanted to save my sister, and myself, I had to stop pretending this was temporary. I had stolen 20 million from men who don't care about money, only principle. And they collect on principle with more than cash. Ahead of me were long nights, dumb allies, betrayals, and mistakes I hadn't made yet. All I told myself was, if you're in it, you finish it. Otherwise, it finishes you. And right then, my pocket buzzed. A new number. A number I'd given to only one person. I answered, said nothing, and on the other end, I heard nothing but breathing. That's how wars start, with silence that feels louder than anything you've ever heard. I didn't sleep that night. I just sat on the edge of a cheap motel bed, staring at the wallpaper that looked like it had been peeling since the 80s, trying to convince myself the call had been nothing. Just a prank, a wrong number, maybe even a bad connection. But I knew better. In this business, silence is never an accident. Silence is the point. It's the warning before the storm. By morning, I checked out of the motel without even turning in the key. I left it dangling from the door like an abandoned thought. I drove aimlessly, taking random turns, switching lanes too often, watching mirrors like they were TV screens with one channel, me. Paranoia isn't a side effect, it's the oxygen of stolen money. And with 20 million burning a hole in my existence, I was suffocating on it. I thought about disappearing. West Coast, new name, fake ID, blending into the noise of Los Angeles where no one cares who you are unless you're famous. But disappearing costs money, and every dollar I touched was radioactive. Spend too much too fast, they smell it. Spend too little, they notice you're hiding. The money was supposed to buy freedom, but all it bought me was a prison cell without walls. I went back to Philly to see my sister. She didn't need to know the truth, not yet. To her, I was finally the brother who pulled his life together, finally showing up with the bills paid and a steady hand. But every time I held her gaze, I could feel the weight of the lie pressing down. She asked where I was staying. I told her I had an apartment in Jersey, nothing special. She didn't ask for details, and I was grateful. That's when the first real sign came. Walking back to the parking lot, I saw my car, but the rear tire had been cut. Not slashed in a hurry, but surgically. A clean slice, like someone leaving a signature. I stood there, heart hammering in my chest, pretending to fumble for my keys while I scanned the lot. Nothing. No one. Just a couple of nurses on break, smoking in the distance. It was worse than being jumped. This wasn't about hurting me yet. It was about telling me they were here. They could reach me whenever they wanted. I bought a burner phone that night. Cash, corner store, no questions. I made one call, not to the cops, not to any friend, not to my sister. I called Eddie. Eddie was the kind of guy you never introduced to family but always kept in your back pocket. He'd done time for boosting cars, knew people in Newark who could get you papers, weapons, or a new face if you had the cash. I told him I needed advice, off the record. He laughed and said advice is free, but solutions cost triple. I didn't care. I just needed someone who understood the rules of this game. We met in a diner off I-95. Eddie ate pancakes like it was his last meal, drowning them in syrup, while I sat there staring at the window, waiting for headlights that never came. I told him I'd gotten into trouble with the wrong people. He didn't ask who. He didn't need to. He leaned back, wiped his mouth with a napkin, and said, "You got two options. Either you run faster than they can chase, or you make them chase someone else." That's Eddie's wisdom in a nutshell. Survival isn't about being smarter, it's about being less convenient to kill. I left that diner with no appetite and a knot in my gut. Running meant new identity, vanishing act, years of watching over my shoulder. Making them chase someone else meant betrayal, setups, maybe blood. Either way, it meant the kind of choices you don't come back from. I drove all night with Eddie's words rattling around in my skull. By sunrise, I was parked outside an old warehouse near the docks, a place I knew they used for the private games. I wasn't there to play. I was there to watch. I watched the couriers, the guards, the cars that came and went. I studied the rhythm like I used to study poker tells. Patterns. Repetition. Weak spots. And I realized something that froze me to the bone. They weren't being sloppy. They were being deliberate. The way the guards rotated, the way the money moved, it was all theater. They weren't just running games, they were running traps. And I had walked into one without knowing it. That night, when I finally closed my eyes in another nameless motel, I dreamed of the basement table. The faces blurred, the chips clinked like chains, and the man in the gray suit leaned across to me. Except this time, he spoke. Just one sentence. "You took something that doesn't belong to you." I woke up drenched in sweat, the sheets tangled like ropes. The next morning, I knew it was only a matter of time before they stopped leaving warnings and started leaving bodies. And if I didn't make a move soon, the first body was going to be mine. The morning after that nightmare, I sat in my car with the engine running, staring at the cracked windshield, and I finally admitted what I'd been avoiding. I wasn't just hiding. I was stalling. And stalling gets you killed. The mob doesn't send polite reminders. Every hour I waited was an hour closer to them deciding it was easier to erase me than scare me. I thought about Eddie's words again. Run faster, or make them chase someone else. Running still felt impossible. You don't just vanish when you've got 20 million sitting in secret stashes. Money like that is a magnet. It pulls at you, drags you back no matter how far you try to run. So I started thinking about the second option. Making someone else the rabbit. That afternoon, I went back to Atlantic City, to one of the smaller casinos where I used to grind. Not to play, to observe. Old players, desperate ones, guys chasing losses with eyes full of hunger. It hit me that most of them would sell their souls for 10 grand, let alone $1 million. If I needed a scapegoat, the pool was right there. Guys who take money they didn't understand and never ask where it came from until it was too late. I hated myself for even considering it, but fear is louder than guilt. On my way out, I ran into Frankie. Frankie was a degenerate gambler, one of those guys who couldn't fold pocket aces even if his life depended on it. He owed money everywhere, bookies, loan sharks, even the waitresses he promised tips to. I hadn't seen him in months, and he looked worse than I remembered, sunken cheeks, shaky hands, a smell of sweat and cheap cologne trying to cover up rot. He lit up when he saw me, like I was the answer to a prayer. We talked. He bragged about a system he'd been working on, some nonsense about reading shuffle patterns. I listened, nodding, pretending I cared, while my brain worked overtime. Frankie was perfect. A guy like him was already drowning. All I had to do was hand him an anchor, and he'd sink himself. And the mob? They'd be more than happy to believe someone as sloppy as Frankie had tried to get smart with their money. The idea stuck in my head like a thorn. I drove back to Jersey and sat in the dark with the case in front of me, counting and recounting stacks just to hear the sound of bills snapping. I thought about planting some of it on Frankie, maybe letting him taste just enough to start flashing around. The mob would see it, sniff it out, and I'd be in the background, invisible. It was cruel. It was dirty. But it was survival. Before I could act, the next sign came. I came back to my motel one night and found the door ajar. Just an inch, barely noticeable. Inside, nothing was missing. Not a single dollar, not even the burner phone. But the case had been moved. Not stolen, moved. Like someone wanted me to know they'd been there, standing over it, standing over me while I slept. I sat on the bed, shaking, staring at the untouched case, and I knew they weren't guessing anymore. They knew exactly who they were hunting. The pressure was unbearable. Every shadow felt like a gun barrel, every face in the crowd looked like a spotter. I stopped eating, stopped sleeping, started pacing like an animal in a cage. The 20 million that once felt like salvation now felt like a death sentence, ticking louder every hour. That's when Eddie called me. Not the other way around, he called me. He never did that. I answered, and his voice was calm, almost too calm. He told me he'd heard whispers. My name was in rooms it shouldn't be in. The words were short, clipped, but the message was clear, the clock was almost out. If I wanted a shot at surviving, I needed to make my move immediately. He offered to set up a meeting. Not with the mob, with someone else. A fixer. A middleman who specialized in cleaning messes like mine. For a price, of course. I didn't ask how much. At that point, I would have promised my soul if it bought me another week of breathing. We set the meeting for 2 nights later. Neutral Ground, a bar on the outskirts of Newark. Eddie swore it was safe. He swore he trusted the guy. But trust is a word that doesn't mean much when you're living in my world. I knew walking in could be the end. But not walking in? That was a guarantee. So I drove there, the case locked in the trunk, sweat dripping down my neck the whole way. I told myself this was the turning point. That maybe, just maybe, I could cut a deal, pay my way out, vanish before the storm fully broke. But when I stepped inside that bar, the first thing I saw wasn't Eddie, or the fixer, or even the bartender. It was a man in a gray suit, sitting alone at a corner table, smiling politely, like he'd been waiting for me all along. The moment I saw him, my stomach dropped like I'd swallowed lead. The same gray suit, the same polite smile, the same man who had once just shaken my hand a second too long. And now here he was, in Newark, waiting at a table like this was just another business meeting. I froze in the doorway, half considering turning right back around. But walking out would have been worse. You don't run from men like him. You sit. You listen. You pretend you're not afraid, even when fear is pouring out of you in waves. So I walked over, slid into the chair across from him, and forced my hands to stay still on the table. He didn't say my name. Didn't need to. He just looked at me with those eyes that weren't angry, weren't even curious. Just patient. The kind of patience that comes from knowing time is always on your side. He leaned slightly forward, folded his hands, and spoke so softly I had to lean in just to catch it. You took something that belongs to us. That was it. No threats, no screaming, no theatrics. Just a fact. And the way he said us told me everything. He wasn't just speaking for himself. He was the voice of something bigger, older, colder. I wanted to lie. To say I didn't know what he was talking about. But lies are poker hands, you only play them when you've got a chance to win. With him, I had no chance. So I stayed quiet, letting the silence stretch between us like a rope waiting to snap. Finally, he smiled again. You're not stupid. That's good. Stupid men die fast. Smart men, we can use. The words rattled me more than any threat could have. Use me? For what? My heart was pounding so loud I could barely hear the rest. He said they weren't interested in punishing me, not yet. What they wanted was simple. A test. One job, one errand, something that would prove where I stood. Do it right, maybe they'd let me live. Do it wrong, and 20 million wouldn't be the thing that killed me. I nodded like I understood, but inside, panic was screaming. This wasn't an offer. It was a leash. A way to pull me deeper into their world until I was too tangled to ever get out. But saying no wasn't an option. Not there, not in that moment. So I agreed. And that's when he leaned back, relaxed, and told me what they wanted. A delivery. Not money this time, information. A drive to Boston, a drop-off to a man whose name he didn't give me, only a photo. No cops, no questions, no delays. Just me and a package. He slid a small black case across the table, not nearly as heavy as the one I'd stolen. I didn't open it. Didn't want to know what was inside. Drugs, guns, documents, it didn't matter. Whatever it was, I was now a courier for the very people I'd robbed. I walked out of that bar shaking, clutching the case like it was a live bomb. Eddie was waiting outside, leaning against his car, smoking like it was just another night. He didn't even look surprised to see me holding it. That's when it hit me, Eddie had known all along. He wasn't just helping me. He was part of the funnel, steering me straight into their hands. I should have punched him. I should have screamed. Instead, I just lit one of his cigarettes and smoked in silence, because what else was there to do? I was already in the cage. And the only way out now was to play the game they'd set in front of me. That night, back at my motel, I opened the black case just once. Curiosity got the better of me. Inside wasn't what I expected. No drugs, no weapons. Just a stack of neatly bound papers, contracts, signatures, numbers. Documents worth something to someone. I closed it fast, hands trembling. I sat there staring at the ceiling, realizing this was no longer about money. This was about survival. They didn't want their 20 million back. They wanted to own me. To turn me into another moving part in their machine. And as I lay there, chain-smoking until the dawn, a thought kept gnawing at me. Maybe 20 million hadn't been a jackpot at all. Maybe it was just the buy-in. The drive to Boston felt like a funeral procession. My funeral. Every mile marker on I-95 was another nail in the coffin, every passing car another set of eyes that could have been watching me. I had the black case on the passenger seatbelt strapped across it like it was a child. I didn't dare put it in the trunk. Out of sight meant out of control, and I wasn't letting this thing out of my sight for a second. I didn't blast music or try to distract myself. I just drove in silence, the hum of the road louder than any song. My mind kept circling back to the 20 million. I hadn't touched most of it, hadn't spent more than a few thousand on motels, food, gas. It was still there, waiting for me like a second chance. But what good was money if every bill carried a death sentence? By the time I hit the outskirts of Boston, my nerves were shredded. I parked 2 blocks from the meeting spot, a rundown warehouse by the docks. The kind of place where no one hears anything, no matter how loud. I sat there, staring at the case, debating whether to run. Just ditch the car, take the money I'd stashed back in Jersey, vanish before they even realized I was gone. But then I remembered the men in the hospital lobby. They'd already proven they could find me anywhere. Running wasn't freedom. It was just a countdown. So I carried the case in, steps echoing on the concrete floor. A single light bulb swung overhead, casting shadows like knives. There was a man waiting, not the one from the photo. Someone else. Thin, sharp-faced eyes like glass. He didn't greet me, didn't smile, didn't even move. He just extended his hand, waiting. I set the case down between us. He popped it open, flipped through the papers, and for the first time I saw a flicker of emotion. Not satisfaction. Not approval. Confusion. His brow furrowed, and he looked at me like I'd handed him a joke instead of a package. That's when the door behind me slammed open. 2 men stormed in, guns already drawn, shouting orders. Federal jackets. FBI. My first instinct was to run, but there was nowhere to go. Concrete walls, armed agents, a spotlight now cutting across the room. The sharp-faced man lunged for the case, but one of the agents tackled him before he got a step. Papers flew everywhere, scattering across the floor like feathers. Hands grabbed me, shoved me face down, cuffed me before I could even breathe. My cheek pressed into the cold concrete, and all I could think was, this is it. This is where it all ends. Not by the mob, not by a bullet, but in a cage with steel bars. But then, as they pulled me up, one of the agents leaned close and whispered something that froze me solid. You're lucky. We've been looking for you. Lucky. That word rang in my ears like a sick joke. They dragged me outside, shoved me into the back of a van, and the whole time I was trying to process what just happened. Why were they there? How did they know? And why the hell would the mob send me to deliver a case straight into a federal sting? The ride was silent. No questions, no explanations. Just the sound of tires chewing up the road. When they finally pulled off into an underground garage, I was hauled into a small room, cuffs still biting into my wrists. One agent sat across from me, calm, almost casual. He slid a folder onto the table and pushed it toward me. Inside were photos. Me walking into the Brooklyn Club. Me leaving with the case. My car on the bridge that night. My sister at the hospital. They had everything. Every move, every mistake, every shadow I thought I'd outrun. The agent told me the mob hadn't sent me to Boston to prove myself. They'd sent me as bait. The papers weren't worth anything, they were planted. The entire job was designed to flush me into federal hands. A neat little package. No need to chase me down, no need to get their hands dirty. Just let the feds do it for them. I sat there stunned, the weight of it crushing me. The mob hadn't forgiven me. They hadn't spared me. They just handed me over. To them, I was already dead. The agent leaned in, voice low and deliberate. You want to survive this? You're going to help us. Otherwise, $20 million will be the least of your problems. In that moment, I realized I wasn't playing poker anymore. I was the pot. They left me in that gray room for hours, no clock, no window, just the hum of fluorescent lights drilling into my skull. That's how they do it, strip you of time, strip you of bearings, make you question if anyone even remembers you're in there. But I knew. They remembered. They were waiting for me to crack. When the agent came back, he didn't bother with small talk. He just laid it out. They'd been circling the mob for years, building cases that always slipped through cracks. Too many bought lawyers, too many juries afraid to vote guilty. What they needed wasn't evidence. They needed someone inside. Someone disposable. Someone already marked for death. That someone was me. He said I had two choices. I could rot in federal custody while the mob tied up loose ends on the outside, which meant my sister, too. Or I could cooperate. Feed them information, play the game from the inside, and maybe walk away with protection, a new name, a new life. Witness protection, he called it, like it was some golden ticket. But to me, it sounded like another cage, just bigger, with a new lock on the door. I thought about my sister. About how I'd walked into her hospital room, smiling like everything was fine, while men with cold eyes sat just 20 feet away. I thought about Frankie, drowning in debt, and Eddie, grinning in the diner while selling me out like it was nothing. And I thought about that gray suit, smiling across the bar, patient, polite, eternal. There was no world where I came out clean. Not anymore. So I played for time. I told the agent I'd think about it. He gave me a look like he'd heard that line 1,000 times, then left me alone again. They didn't cuff me to the table this time. Maybe they thought they'd broken me already. When they finally let me out, it wasn't with freedom. It was with a leash. They released me, but not really. I could feel them watching, waiting for me to lead them somewhere useful. I wasn't stupid. Every call I made, every step I took, every face I looked at, they'd know. Back in Jersey, I sat in my car, chain smoking, trying to figure out which news I preferred. The mob wanted me dead. The feds wanted me useful. Both sides saw me as a tool. Nobody cared what I wanted. And what I wanted, what I needed, was a way out. Not a fake new life in the suburbs. Not a bullet in the back of my head. Out. That night, I drove to one of my stashes. A locker in a storage unit outside Trenton. Inside, stacked neat and tight, was a fraction of the 20 million. Not all of it. Just enough to remind me it was real. Enough to remind me I still had something nobody else knew about. I sat there, running my hands over the bills, and a thought hit me like a punch. Maybe this wasn't the endgame. Maybe the feds and the mob thought they were playing me, but what if I played them both? What if the money wasn't a curse, but leverage? The idea scared me more than anything, because it meant I wasn't done yet. It meant I was about to gamble again, only this time the stakes weren't chips or dollars. This time it was my life, my sister's life, and the lives of anyone foolish enough to stand too close. When I locked the unit and stepped back into the night, the cold air hit me hard. I realized I'd already made my choice. I wasn't going to rot in prison. I wasn't going to vanish into witness protection. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let the mob erase me quietly. If I was going down, I'd go down playing the only game I knew. And maybe, just maybe, I could still find a way to win. The day it all came together started like any other: gray skies, coffee gone cold in a paper cup, the same motel wallpaper I'd been staring at for weeks. But my chest felt different, like something was about to crack wide open. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe it was just the weight of two giants pressing in from opposite sides. The feds had been circling tighter, calling me in, asking for scraps. Names, dates, locations. I gave them half-truths, enough to keep them from locking me up, never enough to burn me instantly. Meanwhile, the mob had gone quiet. Too quiet. And silence from them was worse than any threat. It meant they weren't guessing anymore. They were planning. I decided I wasn't going to wait to be squeezed to death. If both sides wanted me, I'd drag them straight into each other's jaws. It was reckless. It was suicidal. But it was the only play left. I called Eddie first. Told him I had something hot, the rest of the money, ready to move. His voice perked up like a dog catching a scent. He said he'd pass the word along. He didn't realize he was just another piece on the board. Then I called the agent. Told him I had proof, not just stories, real evidence, but it needed a handoff. Same time, same place. I picked an abandoned factory on the edge of Jersey, neutral ground, plenty of exits, plenty of shadows. The night of, I loaded the trunk with 2 cases, one stuffed with real cash, the other with blank paper cut to size. The real one I left at another stash, hidden, because no matter what happened, I wasn't letting go of my last card. When I pulled up to the factory, it was already humming. Black SUVs idling on one side, men in cheap suits on the other. The feds and the mob, both waiting for me to walk in. For 1 second, I considered turning the car around, disappearing into the night. But the truth was, there was no disappearing anymore. This was it. I carried the case inside, set it on a rusted table under a hanging light. Both sides watching, eyes sharp, hands close to weapons. And for the first time, I felt calm. Because in that moment, everyone was betting on me, and none of them realized the deck was already stacked. The agent stepped forward, asking for the case. One of the mob guys cut him off, claiming it first. Voices rose, sharp, angry. I just stood back and let the fuse burn. Then the shouting turned to shoving, and shoving turned to guns being drawn. And just like that, the place exploded. Shots cracked, echoes bouncing off the walls, men screaming, bodies hitting concrete. I dropped to the ground, crawling through the chaos, glass raining from shattered windows. The case was forgotten, the money forgotten. All that mattered was who shot first, who shot last. I slipped out a side door, blood pounding in my ears, smoke trailing from the factory like a signal flare. Behind me, both sides tore each other apart, and for once, I wasn't in the middle. I was gone. I drove all night, no destination, just asphalt and fear. By dawn, I was sitting at a gas station 2 states away, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked like a ghost. Maybe that's what I was now, not alive, not dead, just something in between. The 20 million was still out there, hidden where no one but me could touch it. I could take it and build a new life, or I could keep running until the road finally swallowed me whole. I didn't know which. I still don't. All I know is this: I stole $20 million from the Italian mob, and I'm still breathing. For how long? That's the gamble. If you listened this far, if you felt the heat of this story and wondered how it ends, the truth is, it doesn't end. Not yet. Because as long as I'm alive, the game keeps going. So do me a favor, hit that like button, subscribe, and stick around. Because the next chapter? It might be the last hand I ever play.